Hey, welcome back to Album April. It's April 12th, and today I listened to Kid A by Radiohead. In the past, I have listened to Radiohead's first three albums, Pablo Honey, The Bends, and OK Computer, and I liked all of them a lot. Creep and Fake Plastic Trees are still some of my favorites. But for a lot of people, it wasn't until their next album, Kid A, that things really got interesting. In a lot of ways, Kid A was a bold move on Radiohead's part. There were no singles released from this album. It was entirely distributed online back in the year 2000, and it was a complete departure in sound. They had gone from more of like a rock, alt-rock kind of vibe to a lot more avant-garde, experimental, electronic. And that risk seemed to have paid off because the Kid A is often regarded as the best album Radiohead ever made. Even better than OK Computer, which is often called one of the best albums of all time. So I listened to it, and my first impression was that I don't think it's that they chose not to release any singles from this album. I would make the argument that there are no singles from this album. There's no songs on it, except maybe one that would make sense as a single release. None of them really would have had any chance at radio play because of the way that they sound. They're not structured like a standard song as we know it. As sort of bizarre as some aspects of Radiohead's previous work was, they still followed pretty standard structures. They had choruses, verses, beginnings, middles, ends. That's not how I would describe any of the music from Kid A. A lot of it reminded me of video game music that seems to provide more of an ambiance than sort of like give you a hook and like memorable lyrics and stuff like that. There does seem to be a common theme for most of the songs in Kid A, which is that they'll start out with a musical motif and they'll keep repeating it and building onto it. The national anthem has this bass line, Idiotech has this drum machine loop, and that way it's kind of like a Daft Punk album. Out of all the songs from Kid A, my favorite by a pretty wide margin was Optimistic. That is the only song from Kid A that would have any chance as a single. It has a defined theme, a defined hook, it's catchy, it's well-paced, I liked it a lot. It's probably not a coincidence that out of all the songs on Kid A, Optimistic is the one that sounds like it could have come from OK Computer. There were a handful of songs on Kid A that I didn't like. I actually didn't care for everything in its right place. There was a lot of like bleep bloopy electronic sounds in my ear, like up in like the background. And there was this one part that was like blah, 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 and it just sounded dumb to me. But for the most part, there isn't much to separate any of these songs from each other. They really just feel like one continuous sort of thing. So it makes more sense just to say what I think of the album as a whole, which was that there were a lot of good ideas in it, there were a lot of good moments in it, but it got boring a few times. Apparently there was a lot of jazz influence for this record, and it shows. A lot of it is very freeform, very almost improvisational sounding. And lastly is the question of, does this album hold up? It is a very interesting experience to listen to it now, but I like their first three albums a lot more than this. I think at the beginning, one of the biggest draws of Radiohead was their ability to tell stories. Kid A is a little too freeform to do that, or at least not in a way that's intuitive. Though overall, it does not surprise me in the least that I didn't care for this album and other people went completely nuts for it. Radiohead is a band that is constantly switching things up, changing their sound from album to album. So given my taste, it makes sense because the first three albums lined up more with what I personally seek out. Alright, thank you for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow.